Earlier, I spoke with Cameron Hudson, Policy Director of the Center for the Prevention of Genocide. I asked him about the leverage China could have in helping bring an end to the conflict in South Sudan. And I also spoke with him about his personal experiences with the world's youngest nation. Hudson was a part of the U.S. delegation to the peace talks between North and South Sudan.
I mean, it's heartbreaking. I mean, it really is heartbreaking because you put your blood, sweat, and tears into this enterprise. And the people who are fighting, the people who are currently detained and in prison, are friends of yours. You spend literally hours and hours, days and days, months and months in political negotiations, locked in hotel rooms, in other parts of the world, away from your family. And so you end up spending holidays with these people, you end up spending downtime with these people, and you begin to believe in the cause and believe in them personally. And so when you see on the news stories of the total deprivation, the fighting, and the arrest and detainment of people who you worked with as colleagues, it's really emotional and really heartbreaking.
And we all know that these things spin out of control, but the longer they go on, the harder and harder it is to stitch things back together again. So give me best case scenario, worst case scenario as you see it now.
Well, I think that what we're going to see is a battlefield victory for one side, and that's going to force the hand at the political talks. I don't think that we're going to see a political resolution to this crisis without some kind of turning of the tide on the battlefield. And I think that the government forces are in the best position to win the fight. They are able to rearm and resupply themselves. The rebels, which constitute a portion of the army that fled, they just don't have the sustainability that they'll require over the long term to turn the tide against the government. So eventually there'll be a military defeat that will be very costly in terms of lives. It will be harder to rebuild society afterwards, but I think that's what's going to be the cause of a political breakthrough at the talks.
What role can China play in terms of mediation?
China has an enormously influential role to play in this. They obviously have the largest financial investment inside of Sudan and South Sudan. They purchase 90% of the oil that's produced, that comes out of there. And so they're contributing significant amount to both Sudan and South Sudan's government revenues. So with that, those revenues now far outpace any levels of development assistance and humanitarian assistance that might be coming from other Western countries. So they have a huge influence. They haven't used their political leverage as much as they could. And I think that we're starting to see China begin to enter into a phase where they recognize that in order to preserve the very substantial economic investments that they have in the region, that they're going to have to start to use the political leverage that they have available to them. The South Sudanese and the people of South Sudan have to determine for themselves how they're going to be governed and who is going to govern them and what the final political dispensation of that country looks like. But what China can do is they can set some ground rules and they can bookend it and they can say, we're not going to tolerate this kind of violence against civilians. We're not going to tolerate the destruction of oil infrastructure or other kinds of infrastructure in the country that we've seen fall prey to looting and other kind of vandalism in the process of the fighting. So they can set some parameters for what's acceptable and not acceptable, both on the battlefield and at the political talks. And I think that would really help to ground both the fighting that's going on and the talking that's going on and help to focus it.
Shorten the time last too, as in terms of, I mean, you're talking about violence and it continuing to spill over. I mean, can it shorten it?
I think so, absolutely. I mean, the Chinese have great influence, and I think one of the things that China has done very effectively is it has used that influence in a back channel. So it hasn't been terribly public in telegraphing its concern. It's primarily chosen to stay behind the scenes. If they were to come out and to speak more publicly, more directly to the South Sudanese political and military leadership, I think that shift in tone and that shift in tactic by China would send a very powerful signal to the actors in South Sudan that they need to start to make more progress in the political side.
Cameron Hudson, thank you so much for your observations.
Thank you.